Today, let's sew a fun with squares quilt top. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are talking about how to make this fun with squares quilt top. This was really one of my favorite quilts I've done so far. All of this is squares, and there's a full Etsy pattern available in case you would like to make one too. Now for this, you are going to want some 6.5-inch squares and some 3.5-inch squares, and I have the full numbers on the screen here, so it's a lot easier for you to just pause, take a screenshot, write it all down. But basically, we're just using two different sizes of squares to create this pattern. Now I did break mine up so that those larger squares are actually two different types of fabrics, which we'll get into a little bit later on. So I'm going to take those larger squares out of the way, and I'm going to be focusing on these 3.5 by 3.5-inch squares, and we are going to be making what I'm going to call our quilt block square. So for this, we need to combine all four of these together to create a larger square. So I'm going to set two of these aside, and what I'm going to do now is just match up two squares at a time. So I have this green and a purple, so this is the rectangle I'm trying to create. So I'm going to match these with right sides together, and then just pin across that top portion so you can see the right sides of those fabrics are matching. And then I'm just going to pin it right across the top. You could use pins or quilting clips, and then take a seam. And then I'm going to repeat that exact same step for the rest of the small squares. So just matching all of them up so that I get pairs of squares that are matched up, and then I can just take a seam across all of these. Now here I have sort of matched them into sort of larger squares as well. Now for this, you are going to want a 1/4-inch seam allowance. I love my 1/4-inch seam quilting foot. I find it so much easier, but you definitely do not need this. You can use a regular quilting foot and just take a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Now I am going to backstitch at both the beginning as well as the end, and then I am going to do more of like a chain method where I'm just going to backstitch at the end there, and then I'm going to bring my next square pair up and I'm going to begin sewing that as well. So backstitching at the beginning and then doing the next seam, and then just repeating this until I get through all of the seams for all of those squares. It just helps save some of my resources as well as thread. So here's my long chain of squares. So I'm just going to go through and cut them apart. Since we did the back stitching, our thread isn't going to unravel. And then you can take all of these apart so that you get all of your new square pairs. So now if we look at one of these, we can open it up, and this is what that seam looks like. It's nice and straight across. It's very neat looking. So I now want to go through and just press this open so that it lays nice and flat. Pressing also helps just your quilt overall look really professional. So I'm just going to go through with my iron and press all of these seams. Once I have that done, I'm going to then match two of those square pairs together to create that one larger square. So this is how we're creating our patchwork square. You can see it's just two of those rectangles matched up. And now we want to sew these together along that long edge so that we can create the full square. So I'm just going to be putting these with right sides together and taking that seam all the way down that long edge so that I can create this one bigger square. So for this, if you start to notice that any of your squares seem to be slightly off, it's most likely an issue of when you cut out the square. If you cut out all of your squares to be exactly 3.5 by 3.5 inches and you took a 1/4-inch seam allowance, these should line up very nicely. Once you have that done for one square, just repeat the process for all of the rest of these patchwork squares. So I'm just showing you here all of its right sides together, just making sure that all the seams are matching. And now we're just going to take all of these square pairs, bring them over to our sewing machine, and sew them up similar to how we did with the rectangles before. So here is my big collection now of all of those patchwork squares, very similar to what we did earlier. I'm just going to divide these apart, and then I'm going to use my iron to just press open that seam so that they all lay nice and flat. So here are all of my patchwork squares. I'm going to be calling these patchwork squares as we go forward compared to the fabric squares that we'll be using to kind of mix and match. Now that we have all of these done, we can go through the process of laying out our quilt top. So for the quilt top, there's going to be 7 columns and 7 rows. So I'm just going to go through laying out one piece of fabric square, one patchwork, one piece of fabric, one patchwork. So here you can see that there's 6 rows, 6 columns. There is going to be a 7th row and a 7th column, but you can see it's kind of matching between that light color square, dark color square, going back and forth. So now that we have all of these laid out, it's time for us to start building out our columns. So for this, we're just going to be matching those squares in one column, and then you'll have an extra square top that then we will bring everything together. So I'm going to start with the bottom here. So I'm going to take my fabric square, and then I also have my patchwork square. And I'm just going to match these with right sides together, folding this over, and then along that edge, I'm just going to be pinning it up. So you can see here the right sides are together, and then I'm just going to go through the top and just clip that long edge so that I can have these two squares be sewn together. So this is what it's all going to look like. So it's going to look very spooky, very fun. But I'm going to now repeat this for the rest of those squares in this column. Like I said, there's 7, so you can't actually match all of these up yet. So I'm just going to be matching up the 6 of them. So taking these 3 seams, and now we're just going to go over to my sewing machine and sew it up. So once again, this is our repetitive process of sewing and then clipping and then sewing and then clipping. So I'm just going to undo this so that we have our 3 pairs, and then I'm just going to open them all back up. And now we're just going to start bringing these all together more so that we can have our entire column. So I'm going to be matching 2, so this is going to be 4 of our squares together, and then we'll have 1 at the top, that will be 3. So then we can start to really build out what this column is going to be looking like. Then last but not least, we're going to do all of that one more time so that we can have this group of 4 and this group of 3 come together to build out our final column. So this will be the last seam we'll need on that one column. So here is what it looks like. So we have 1 done. Now we need to repeat the same process for the other 6. So nothing super hard here, just a lot of repetitive effort going through. You could always sew 2 at a time if you would like. It's really up to how you would like to go through with it. And I'm just going to keep sewing, and then once I have them all sewn up and have all of those columns completed, we are going to be pressing out the seams. So here is my quilt top. I have my 7 columns all done. Each is made up of 7 squares. So now it is time for us to join all of these together into one completed quilt top. So matching 2 of those columns, 2 of the columns, 2 of the columns, then you'll have an extra column which we will be joining on after we start to get those pairs. So for 2 of the columns, we're just going to be matching these with right sides together. So we'll be flipping this over, matching this up with those right sides together. Again, if all of your squares were cut out correctly, if you've been doing the same seam allowance, they should match up. Cotton does have a little bit of a stretch to it though. If needed, you could slightly pull, or you could take the seam out and redo it if that was something that came up for you. So now I'm just going to be sewing this directly across so that we can get these columns to be paired up. And then once you do that, you can just repeat that for the other columns. So I now have 2, 2, and then I did sew those 3 on the left together. And so now it's just time for us to kind of join all of these together as well. So very similar process, bringing this panel of 2 onto the panel of 3, matching it up with right sides together, and then just pinning all of this in place. So very repetitive, the exact same process we've been doing this entire quilt, to just make this bigger and more defined. And then I'm just going to repeat this for the other panel as well to sew it onto this portion. And once you do that, you can actually then press out all of your seams, and then your quilt top is complete. So all 7 of those columns have been sewn together. We have all of our squares. It looks so fun, and it's really come together very, very quickly. So at this point, it's time for you just to turn this into a quilt. So you're going to have some sort of backing that is on the bottom with your batting, and then you have the quilt top on the top of your quilt. So for this, I'm going to leave the instructions a little bit more vague. There's so many videos on how you can do actual quilting. I like to use spray basting just to hold my quilt top onto the batting as well as the quilt back. And then I'm just going through and quilting this by doing a zigzag stitch around all of these Dracula squares, and then a regular stitch around the bat squares. It's really up to you though with how you would like to go through with that. You could also do some sort of free motion quilting. This is what the quilt looks like though once it is all quilted. I think it looks really fun. This especially looks great for Halloween. So now it's just time for me to add my binding. For this, since it is just a straight edge quilt, I am just using regular strips of rectangle fabric, and then I like to sew them together on the diagonal so that it's less bulky. And then I just turn them into binding, which I'll include a video if you're interested in how to make your own binding. But you can also buy this from the store. And then I'm just going to pin this all the way around, matching the right side of the binding with the right side of the quilt top. My cat always gets very excited when it's time for the binding because she likes these strips of the fabric. But now that we have it all pinned in place, I can just go to my sewing machine, sew this up, and then I fold my binding back over, and then I'm just going to be hand sewing all of this to the back of the quilt. There's so many different ways you can do binding. I'm not saying this is the right way by any means. I just love how this technique looks because it gives it a really invisible touch. And here is my completed quilt. It turned out so nicely. It's so fun, especially since this one I did with more Halloween colors. It's very vibrant, but you could really do this with any type of colors, any type of fabric. Really, it could be for any season. Again, all of these were just squares, so very quick, very easy to put together. The whole pattern is available on Etsy if you want more of a step-by-step written instruction, or you can just follow along with this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next. Thanks for watching.